I've always been the one who showed up. When my brother broke his collarbone junior year, I drove him to every single physical therapy appointment for 3 months, rearranging my college schedule around his recovery. When my dad had his gallbladder removed 2 years later, I took a week off work without being asked. That was just who I was in my family, the dependable one, the one who dropped everything. So when I found out I needed spinal surgery, I genuinely believed they would do the same for me. I was 31. I'd been dealing with a herniated disc for almost 2 years, managing it with injections, physical therapy, anti-inflammatories. But the pain had gotten to a point where my neurosurgeon said we were out of options. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in late October, an anterior cervical discectomy and fusion. My surgeon explained it was serious but routine for someone with my level of nerve compression. Recovery would be 6 to 8 weeks. I'd need help at home for at least the first 2. I told my family in early September, my parents, my older brother, my sister-in-law. I sat them down at Sunday dinner and explained what was happening, what the procedure involved, what the recovery would look like. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. My dad said, "Whatever you need, baby girl." My brother said he was sorry I'd been dealing with this and that he wished I'd said something sooner. I felt so relieved. I thought we were a family who showed up. What I didn't know, what nobody mentioned at that dinner table, was that my parents and my brother had already booked a 2-week trip to Italy. Florence, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. They'd been planning it for over a year, saving up for it, booking everything in advance. Non-refundable flights, a villa rental, wine tours my sister-in-law had been researching since the previous Christmas. They didn't tell me until 3 weeks later. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could tell right away something was off by the way she started the conversation. "Honey, we need to talk about the timing of some things." That sentence, I still hear it exactly the way she said it. She explained the trip. She said they'd looked into changing the flights, but that the fees were astronomical. She said my surgery was scheduled surgery, not an emergency, and that maybe my surgeon could push the date back a few weeks. She said it in this very gentle, very reasonable voice, like she was explaining something to a child who simply didn't understand logistics yet. I didn't say much. I asked her when they were leaving. October 19th. My surgery was October 24th. They'd be in Italy for the first 2 weeks of my recovery. Back home November 2nd. "We'll be back before you're totally back on your feet," she said. "And we'll be calling every day." I called my surgeon the next morning. I asked if we could push the date. He told me that given the progression of my nerve compression, delaying further wasn't something he could recommend. We were already at the outer edge of his comfort zone with the current timeline. I told my mother this. I sent her the voicemail he left me, where he specifically said waiting longer could risk permanent nerve damage. She said she understood. She said she was sorry. And then they went to Italy anyway. My dad texted me the morning they left. "Praying for you, sweetheart. The doctors are going to take such good care of you. We'll call as soon as we land." He included a little red heart emoji. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and I didn't pick it up again for 4 hours. The one person who didn't get on that plane was my Uncle Cecil. Cecil is my mother's older brother. He's 73, retired, lives about 40 minutes from me in a house he's been in since 1987. He was widowed 7 years ago, and since then he and I had gotten closer than we'd ever been when I was growing up. Sunday phone calls, lunch when I was in his part of town, him coming to my apartment for Thanksgiving a couple years when I couldn't get home for the holiday. He knew about my surgery because I'd told him separately, not at the Sunday dinner, just during one of our usual calls. When I told my family the night before my surgery was the last time anyone outside of a hospital room would see me for a while, Cecil called. Not texted, called. "I'll be there at 6 in the morning, he said. "Uncle Cecil, you don't have to." 6 in the morning, he said again, and he hung up. He was in my hospital room at 6:04. He had a coffee from the gas station near his house because he knew I couldn't have any before surgery, and he said he felt guilty drinking it in front of me, so he just held it without drinking it for the first 20 minutes. I told him that was the silliest thing I'd ever heard, and he laughed, and then I cried a little. The way you do right before something scary when someone finally just sits with you. He held my hand until they wheeled me back. The surgery took about 3 hours. When I woke up in recovery, the nurse told me someone had been asking about me at the desk. It was Cecil, still in the waiting room. He'd read an entire paperback novel cover to cover while I was in surgery. He showed it to me. He'd bought it that morning from a donation bin by the hospital entrance for 50 cents. They kept me overnight. Cecil went home, slept, came back at 8 the next morning, and drove me to my apartment when I was discharged around noon. He helped me get set up on the couch with a wedge pillow the surgical team had recommended, organized my medications by time of day in a little notepad he made himself, went to the pharmacy to fill the prescriptions they'd called in, stopped at the grocery store, and had a pot of soup on my stove by 4 in the afternoon. My parents called that evening from Rome. They were at dinner. I could hear background noise, music, other people, talking, glasses clinking. My mother asked how I was feeling. I said I was okay. She said that's wonderful, and then asked if I'd been able to eat anything. I said yes. She said good, good, and then my dad got on and said something about how the Colosseum had been everything he'd imagined, and asked if I was watching any good TV while I was resting. I said sure, I was fine, I had to go. After I hung up, Cecil looked at me from the armchair across the room. He didn't say anything, he just turned the page of his book. The next 2 weeks looked like this. Cecil came every day. Some days he stayed a few hours, some days he was there by 9 in the morning and didn't leave until after dinner. He drove me to my first follow-up appointment. He kept a small notebook, a green one, I remember, where he wrote down things my surgeon and physical therapist said at appointments, because they'd told him I might not retain everything clearly with the medications I was on. He asked questions I wouldn't have thought to ask. He made sure I was doing my prescribed neck exercises even when I didn't feel like it. My mother texted daily, usually in the morning. Thinking of you. How are you feeling today? I answered, fine, better, tired. She'd reply with an emoji or a short affirmation, and then I wouldn't hear from her again until the next morning's text. My brother texted twice in the first 10 days. Once to say he hoped I was healing well, and once to send me a photo of a vineyard in Tuscany, because he thought it was really pretty and wanted to share. My sister-in-law didn't reach out at all during the first week. Meanwhile, my mother messaged me a video of my dad attempting to order gelato in Italian and getting the pronunciation entirely wrong. She thought it was hilarious. She wanted me to think so too. I watched it. I didn't respond. I want to be honest about something. I didn't time my surgery to interfere with their trip. I want to say that plainly, because I know some people assume that's what happened, that I created the situation on purpose. My surgeon chose the date. The compression in my spine chose the date. What I did do, and I'll own this, is I hoped, genuinely and completely, that when it came down to it my family would choose to stay. I thought that hope was reasonable. I was wrong. What I didn't realize until later was that while all of this was happening, Cecil was paying attention in a way I wasn't even aware of. He never said anything about my parents or my brother during those 2 weeks, never commented on the texts, never reacted to the vineyard photo, never brought up the trip unless I did. He just showed up every day and took care of what needed to be taken care of. I thought that was simply who he was, a decent man filling a gap, but Cecil was also writing things down in that green notebook. Not just my surgeon's instructions, not just the medication schedule. He was keeping a record of everything. The dates and times my parents called, the content of the texts my mother sent, the twice my brother checked in, the days he arrived at my apartment, and I hadn't eaten because I'd been waiting for someone to bring me something and no one had come. The morning I cried in the kitchen because I couldn't wash my own hair without help, and I'd been too embarrassed to ask anyone. He didn't tell me he was doing this. I had no idea. My family came home on a Sunday. They called me from the airport baggage claim, all of them together, speakerphone, their voices loud and overlapping with the sounds of the terminal. My mother said she'd missed me so much. My dad said he couldn't wait to see me. My brother said Italy was absolutely incredible and that I had to go someday, I would love it. They came to my apartment the following Tuesday. Not the Monday after they landed, the Tuesday. My sister-in-law brought pastries from a bakery near their house. My mother brought me a linen scarf she'd bought in Florence. It was a beautiful scarf. I folded it carefully and set it aside. We sat in my living room and they talked about the trip for most of the visit. The food, the hotels, the guided tours, the weather. My mother told a long story about a mix-up at the hotel in Amalfi that was apparently very funny. My dad had brought photos on his phone and went through them one by one. My sister-in-law showed me a video on her phone of their cooking class. At some point, my mother looked around my apartment and said, "Well, it looks like you managed just fine." I looked at her. I said, "Uncle Cecil was here every day." A small silence. My mother said, "Yes, Cecil is so sweet." And then my brother said something and the conversation moved on. They stayed about an hour and a half. When they left, my mother hugged me in the doorway and said she was so glad I was on the mend. My dad kissed my forehead. My brother squeezed my shoulder. After they were gone, I sat on my couch for a long time. Cecil called that evening to ask how it had gone. I told him. Another silence on his end. Then he said, "Okay," very quietly, and then, "I'm glad you're healing." I didn't know what he was thinking. I found out 8 months later. My parents have a tradition. They've done it for as long as I can remember. A big family dinner every spring to celebrate their anniversary. Not the anniversary itself, but closest Saturday to it. My mom books a private room at a restaurant and invites extended family, cousins, my parents' oldest friends, neighbors who've known them for decades. It's been their thing since before I was born. People look forward to it. It's a genuinely lovely tradition. This year it was held on a Saturday in late June. The restaurant was a place in Midtown they'd always loved. Private room, long table, maybe 35 people. My parents had been married 38 years. My aunt had made a slideshow. There were flowers. Cecil sat near the far end of the table. I was a few seats down, across from my cousin. I noticed during dinner that Cecil was unusually quiet, even for Cecil, who is not a man who performs at parties. He ate his meal. He smiled when spoken to. He raised his glass for the toast my brother gave. But he had a stillness about him that night I didn't recognize. After the plates were cleared and before dessert was brought out, Cecil stood up. He's not a tall man. He's about 5'9", gray-haired, the kind of person who doesn't take up much space. But the room went quiet immediately when he rose from his chair. He has that quality, a quietness that makes people listen. He said he had a few things he wanted to say to celebrate 38 years of marriage, and to honor the family that had been built over that time. My mother smiled. My dad reached over and held her hand. Cecil reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a small folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. He started by talking about family. Not in the greeting card way, but specifically, what it means to belong to people. What it means to be the person who shows up. He talked about his late wife, my Aunt Louise, and how in her final months he hadn't left her side, and how that hadn't felt like sacrifice, but like the most natural thing in the world, because she was his. He paused there. Several people nodded. Then he said he wanted to share something that had happened recently, that had caused him to think deeply about what family actually looks like in practice, not in theory. And he read from his green notebook. He read the date of my surgery. He read the date my parents left for Italy, 5 days before the procedure. He read the date they returned, 9 days into my recovery. He described, in plain and specific language, what my recovery had looked like. The medications, the exercises, the appointments, the meals I needed to eat at specific intervals, the fact that I hadn't been able to lift anything over a pound for the first week. He read the dates and times of every call my parents made during those 2 weeks. He read the content of my brother's 2 texts, including the vineyard photo, which he described with no editorializing whatsoever, just the facts. Then he said, "I am not telling this story to shame anyone. I am telling it because I was there, and I believe the truth should be known by the people who love this family." The room was absolutely silent. My mother's face had gone very still. My dad was looking down at the table. My brother had his jaw set in the particular way he gets when he's trying to control his expression. My sister-in-law was looking at her water glass. My cousin, sitting across from me, reached over and put her hand on my arm. Cecil folded the paper carefully and put it back in his pocket. He said one more thing. He said, 38 years is a long time to build something. The question I'd ask is whether what's been built looks the same from the inside as it does from the outside. And then he sat back down and picked up his fork. The room came back to life slowly, the way rooms do after something difficult. People murmured. Someone called for the dessert. Conversations restarted around the edges of the table, careful and subdued. My dad excused himself. My mother sat very straight in her chair, composure intact, and said something gracious to the woman beside her. After dinner, in the parking lot, my brother found me at my car. He said Cecil had no right to do that. He said it was completely inappropriate to air private family matters at an anniversary dinner. He said a lot of things. I let him finish. Then I said, "Were any of the facts wrong?" He didn't answer. I said, "Were any of the dates wrong, the times, anything?" He said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's not the point." I said, "I think it actually is." He walked back to his car. My mother called me the next morning. She was composed, the way she is when she's saying something she's prepared. She said she understood that I had been hurt, and that she was sorry I'd felt abandoned. She said felt abandoned, not been abandoned. I noticed that. She said she hoped we could move forward as a family, and that holding on to resentment wasn't healthy for anyone. I listened to everything she said. I told her I loved her. I told her I needed some time. I told her I was grateful for the scarf. She said she'd give me space. We've talked a handful of times since then. The conversations are careful and shorter than they used to be. I don't know what they look like going forward. I don't have a clean answer for that. What I do have is clarity. And that, it turned out, was the thing I didn't know I was missing. Cecil and I had lunch last month at the diner near his house, the one he's been going to since before I was born, where the waitress knows his usual order and brings his coffee without asking. We didn't talk about the dinner, we talked about everything else. His garden, a book he'd been reading, a road trip he was thinking about taking in the fall, up through the Smoky Mountains, maybe over to Asheville. I asked him, at some point, why he'd decided to say what he said at the dinner. Not defensively. I was genuinely asking. He took a sip of his coffee. He thought about it for a moment. He said, "Because I've watched your family tell a story about itself for 38 years. And I thought the people in that room deserved to know whether the story was true." I looked at him across the table. He said, "You deserve to know that someone had been paying attention." I paid the check. He pretended to argue about it the way he always does. We hugged in the parking lot. He told me to drive safe. On the drive home, I thought about what it means to be seen, not rescued. I want to be clear about that. I'm not someone who needed saving. But there's a difference between going through something alone and going through it unseen. I'd spent a long time believing those were the same thing. That if I was physically okay, if the surgery was successful, if I healed up and went back to my regular life, then it didn't really matter who had shown up. What Cecil gave me wasn't just soup and rides and a medication schedule, as practical and necessary as all of those things were. What he gave me was a record. Evidence that it had happened the way I experienced it, that I wasn't remembering it wrong, or making it bigger than it was, or being oversensitive. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. But sometimes, it needs to be said out loud in a room full of people, before it can stop living exclusively inside you. I'm still figuring out who my family is going forward. I think I'll be figuring that out for a while. But I know this. The people who stayed when it was inconvenient. The people who drove 40 minutes before sunrise because they said they would. The people who wrote things down in a green notebook, not because they planned to use it, but because they thought the truth mattered. Those are my people. And for the first time in a long time, I know exactly who that is.